Right, so you go to work, you do your bit, you clock out again at the end of the day. You expect that to be the end of your day, as far as work is concerned, yes? You're free then to enjoy your free time, enjoy your evening, spend it with your family. That is why it is called thusly free time. The work-life balance, as it's supposedly called, and I realise that that is becoming an increasingly mythical concept for many who have to work more than one job, or for whom ticking off for overtime is the difference to making ends meet or not, and that balance might well be a bit of a joke right now. But at least when you do leave work behind, you can do your own thing. Or at least that is supposed to be how it works. Leave your worries and issues at home and leave your job at the office. That is how it should be. Well, what if the office won't leave you alone? How many of you might have the boss calling you up at the weekend or in the evening, trying to get some more work out of you, or adding to your workload the next day, or asking if you can perhaps come in on your day off? How many times have your plans been screwed up by that? I think we can all agree that that sort of treatment isn't on, in which case you'll be delighted to hear that Keir Starmer doesn't agree with you, and apparently thinks your boss has every right to butt into your downtime. Right, so what's this one all about then, Damo? Well, this is all about Labour's overhaul of workers' rights, which is perhaps a little bit misleading to say. More accurate to say would be the Red Tories' overhaul of workers' rights, which, as ever is the case when it comes to Starmer policy, are getting watered down. Probably because somebody like Peter Mandelson has come along and decided he doesn't like it and thinks Starmer is offering people who should never have any hope at all too much hope, scant as it already was. That man should return to his crypt in his pit of despair and leave all of us alone. Just how many times that man needs politically resurrecting, I don't know, especially when his tune never changes and nothing he has on offer is really in our benefit or to meet our needs. Anyway, the boss contacting you outside of work hours is a frankly ridiculous concept. Should never happen. It's an abuse of their position. People work to live, they don't live to work. And in too many workplaces and institutions, a culture of "we own you" seems to pervade, leading to out-of-work phone calls, unreasonable asks outside of the working day. And Labour had plans to ban bosses from doing this, a staunch separation of the working day, and a chance for those who have endured this sort of treatment to at last perhaps breathe a sigh of relief that when they do clock out at the end of the day, they have very much finished for the day, and that is that. Well, Starmer has now rode back on that to no surprise whatsoever, because when does he ever mean a word he says? When does he ever stick to any of his promises, policies, missions or pledges? How anyone can trust anything Labour come out with after the number of times he has now abandoned his position on this, that and the other, I really don't know. Yet still there are people out there, incredibly, who believe getting the Tories out is more important than believing anything Keir Starmer has to say. Well, see if screwing with your workers' rights so the boss can still pester you after hours for more work, after all. Why else does the boss ring you after hours? See how that goes down. So why has Starmer done this then? Well, do you figure he was ever actually talking to actual workers when he was planning his workers' overhaul? Starmer coming down from his altar to mix with the proles? Don't be silly. When he's discussing workers' rights, who do you think he's talking to? Well, the bosses, of course. The businesses themselves, not the people who work in them, who Labour are supposed to be all about. They're supposed to be the representatives of. They've told Starmer and his team, the bosses here, that a softer approach is what they need to this. We need that flexibility, I suppose is the message they've sent. Never mind what the workers affected by this might have said, because I don't suppose, as I said, Starmer's lot have bothered to ask them. Of course, I'm blaming Starmer here for this. It's like a knee-jerk, isn't it? It's him changing his mind as a rule. He is the leader of the party. And actually, I dare say this had to have been run past him at some point to get anywhere. But actually, this plan seems to have come from Angela Rayner, the former carer, the working-class mum, having completed her transformation seemingly into just another Starmeroid, arguably one of the most blatant examples of working-class betrayals in the Labour Party. So little wonder her very vulnerable Ashton-under-Lyne seat is being targeted by George Galloway's Workers' Party, and I dare say he's not alone in that either. There's few left-wing current or former Labour figures who would be sorry to see her lose her seat now. Businesses have apparently told Rayner and by extension presumably Starmer and others in that circle that to not be able to plague their employees in their downtime would add to business costs on their part, increase pressures on their business, and that classic line that is bound to make Starmer's lot jump. They've apparently said such measures would hamper economic recovery. Oh no, the economy are precious, that will be magicked out of nothing if we stick to full-throated Thatcherism, because that's always worked before, hasn't it? And it will fail inevitably again. Well, says who? Says who? Who says this is all going to happen? Who says this is going to come to pass? Who says this is going to be terrible and awful for the economy and for these businesses? It's the people whose businesses are going to be affected by this. It's the business owners, of course. But sod the people who actually make that business successful. The people who work within it. You screw around with them in their downtime, and Starmer's reforms, inverted commas, sounds like they'll now end up giving business license to do that even more. And that makes people less productive. It wears them out. Overworks them. Fails to give them a healthy work-life balance. They can't really rest if in the back of their minds there's a fear that the boss might ring. Messes up their mood, their mental health. And also the boss gets, some project or other ready by morning he didn't have the staff to do already. Here's a thought. How about you just employ more staff instead of pestering the ones you've already got? If you end up in a position where profits increase because you're overworking your staff, you're pestering them out of hours, then you can afford to employ more people. But if you don't, if you overwork the staff you have, not only are staff more likely to end up taking more sick days, which of course is not productive, but you're also going to have more trouble retaining staff as well, as they won't want to work for you if they can get offered better terms elsewhere where they're not going to get worked to death. It's short-sighted idiocy by greedy bosses, and it's being lapped up by economically inept politicians, power-hungry to do or say anything types like Starmer, Rayner, and the rest of this Labour Party leadership. Every employee has the right to disconnect from work. It's healthy, it's necessary, it's the bit of life that makes it worth living, because as much as you might enjoy your job, it is still your job. It is not your life. Yet that right to disconnect, as it is called, is looking likely to be taken away by a future Labour government, despite it having been Labour policy up until now to implement the right to disconnect into law. It's just the latest letdown by a Labour Party, sure that it is on its way into government and no longer caring if people like it or not, no longer caring if people see them as being on their side, because they think people are going to vote Labour anyway, just because they want the Tories out. But the Tories won't have been voted out, though. They'll have simply been rebranded with Labour Party colours, and of course lots and lots of Union Jack flags to go with that. The right to disconnect is popular. 86% of YouGov poll respondents support it, along with 79% supporting flexibility in working hours, and 71% support raising the level of statutory sick pay. So a lot of what Labour have talked about in their reforms have been popular. The right to disconnect has been described as gold dust policy. And when Rayner went to Scotland recently and headlined this policy, it went down well, even there in Scotland. A big make work pay speech, but as usual, when it comes to the crunch, this Starmer-led regime will do what the bosses want and not what ordinary working class people who work for them want, and what will benefit them. So this is no Labour Party anymore, just another Tory party masquerading as Labour. This was good policy, and it's been walked back on for no sensible reason at all. Donor pressure, I suppose, is what it all comes down to. The donors, those wealthy enough to be political party donors, they do tend to be the bosses in these pictures after all. Is that part of it? Mandelson has stuck his nose in saying to Starmer, don't rush this, never having been on the side of workers one day in his life, a leftover from the Blair era, which is where he should have been left. It means other parts of employment reform, while still looking good, can't be trusted to be met. It was a hard sell to believe them anyway after Starmer's long list of lies, but there we are. Ending 0 hours contracts, banning unpaid internships, that'll be good given how many MPs do that. Cost of living impacts to be linked to the setting of the minimum wage. There's some good stuff here. But you'd be daft to believe Starmer will do any of it once in power, because benefiting ordinary working class people is not who he is in it for. He's in it for himself and those who will fund him. So therefore, his Labour will bend to donors' wishes. His Labour will bow to big business squealing about the economy each and every time they're squeezed just a little bit. And I wouldn't trust anything a Starmer-led Labour Party ever came out with on anything. Besides, Starmer and his equally hypernasal wannabe Chancellor of the Exchequer, the toilet photo shoot frequenter Rachel Reeves, have already said their plans for economic growth are rooted in the continuation of Thatcherism, praising what she did in the 80s. And when it comes to employment, well, Those that remember those days, and I grew up through them, will know this led to an awful lot of unemployment. So if she's the object of their praise, that's even more of a red flag on employment legislation for all of us. Or really should be. If you haven't woken up yet, come on, you need to. Get the details of that story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.